Welcome to Talking Tech, the podcast all about technology. In this particular episode, I am joined again by the wonderful John Stevenson. Welcome back, because obviously, you've been in a previous episode, which was brilliant. But in this particular episode, we're actually going to be doing a little bit more of a deeper dive into CoreView. So firstly, welcome back. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back with you, Catherine.
Thank you very much. And it's I'm actually quite excited about this one because I know obviously in the last episode, we started talking about CoreView and obviously some of the challenges and the problems it solves. In this particular one, we've actually got quite a few things that obviously we're going to in a little bit more detail. So before I start, I'm going to ask a quick question. So let's kind of delve straight into it. What is the cyber resilient enterprise? What does it mean in the context of Microsoft 365? And how do we go about building one?
Well, there we are. Those are the germane questions of the moment, Catherine. Seriously, bit of background. Reason this came about as a topic was off the back of some work that CoreView have been doing with industry analysts IDC. Yeah? And what we set out to do really was to look at what the resilient enterprise would look like, cyber resilient enterprise would look like. And particularly what that meant for that enterprise's core applications and infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And even more particularly, therefore, to Microsoft 365. So that was a project that we've undertaken. There's actually a report that's available. You can download a copy of it from our website, and I believe there'll be a link to it available with this session. A report from IDC that really dives deep into this stuff and explains a lot more about it. But I think it will be relevant and interesting to the people listening to this session if we just take a step back for a moment and just survey the landscape, so to speak. So for probably 30 of the last 40 years, the big thing, as you may all listening to this podcast be aware, the big thing was the notion that cybersecurity was something you went out and bought. You went and bought some cybersecurity from a vendor, and it stopped bad things happening.
And it solved all the problems.
It stopped bad things happening. That was great, yeah. And of course, many times it did stop bad things happening. However, also on many occasions it didn't stop bad things happening, and that created a number of problems. Obviously, it created a reputational problem for the security professional who'd recommended and or gone out and bought the thing to stop the bad things happening. It created, and I think it still does tarnish a little, the relationship between the security professional and the vendor community on the basis of vendors not necessarily being trusted to deliver on what they promise, which is a whole separate topic we could have a podcast on. But it creates a problem up the command chain, because if you go and say, I've spent a lot of money on stuff to stop bad things happening, and they still happen, then at a leadership level, a couple of things arise. The first thing is, well, you said this would stop bad things happening. And the other thing is, so what's the plan then? Yeah. What's the greater plan look like? At a C level, business is actually essentially all about risk mitigation. That's what it is. Whether it's the risk to your profits, the risk to your premises from an act of God or fire or theft or whatever, it's all about risk mitigation. And if your risk mitigation strategies are bought a load of stuff to stop bad things happening, full stop, end of story, it's not a very good story. And so cyber resilience has really emerged over recent years as a way of looking at the situation, looking at the landscape and saying, well, what do we need to do? You know what we need to do? We need to be able to try and prevent stuff happening that's bad, sure. We need to also be able to detect stuff that's happening that's bad. Yeah, that sounds great as well. We should have a plan to respond when bad things happen, because they will. Yeah. And we need to be able to find an elegant way to recover. Oh, and finally, it would be a good idea if we learned from all of that for next time. So cyber resilience, if you like, straddles a series of activities. So prevent, detect, respond, recover, learn. Okay. And the other thing that's important, I think, to say at this point is cyber resilience isn't just about lumps of technology, although they play a part, of course they do. But it's also about people and process and procedure, a way of looking at things. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, when we start to talk about building the cyber resilient enterprise, we need to take account of our core business applications and infrastructure. And for many, Microsoft 365 is an essential and integral part of their core business applications and infrastructure. So you can't really have a credible cyber resilience plan without taking Microsoft 365 and the tenant itself, the tenant's resilience, into account. I think that's the fundamental point to get across here. Tenant resilience is integral to your cyber resilience plan. Now, okay, what does that mean in terms of Microsoft 365 itself?
That was going to be my next question. How does it kind of?
I think it's a natural question to ask because 365 is a sophisticated, some would say complex creation or platform. It has over 60 applications and services. They span personal productivity tools, but also software as a service, platform as a service, an amazing set of collaborative tools, an entire security stack from top to bottom. So it's a very, very big and complicated beast. With that come a whole bunch of challenges when you want to look at the resilience of the tenant itself. Some of that is to do with the fact that it's big and complex. Some of it to do with the fact that it was never designed to look like this at the outset. It's grown into this thing over time, driven by the best of intentions. I mean, it's kind of it's always been driven by the idea of how can we make it possible to collaborate? How can we build this virtual environment in the sky that people are going to live and work in? And I will smile, Catherine, because I think, it's kind of like someone took your server room. If you remember one of those things, remember server rooms?
I do, yes,
racks with,
and the big boxes that you
the pizza slice servers in the racks, all that. Yeah, it's kind of like someone took your server room and they stuck it in the cloud, and they gave lots of keys to lots of people to go in and out of it and unlock different bits of the racks and go into the different bits of the servers and things. And then no one told you how to find out what they were doing in there. And that's kind of where we are as an environment. So to make that resilient, it's no small challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think especially with the way that things have moved, obviously you mentioned about the cloud and the kind of migration and so on. Talk to me about urgency and obviously the importance of that within.
Well, I mean, it's great for a vendor to sit here and say, "Hey, look, this XYZ topic is incredibly important, isn't it?" But the world is full of vendors saying that. I think what lends this topic a certain urgency right now is the fact that eyes are on the topic at a legislative level, at a regulatory level, at a national level, even at a pan-national level. Resilience, cyber resilience, and in the context of what we're talking about today, tenant resilience, is under the microscope. And I'm going to go on and say a little bit more about that later on what it means in terms of the plans organisations should be putting in place.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Yeah, because I think there's a big topic, as you mentioned, there's almost another topic on top of regulatory and legislative affairs and obviously the associated fines and so on. But we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. I think one of the questions that we've had quite a lot from the audience is, I'd love for you to be able to explain to them the extent of the attack surface when it comes to Microsoft 365, because I think that's quite an important area. Yeah,
and again, it really does underscore the need for a structured approach to the challenges that we all face. So the statistic that always makes me pause for a second is there are 600 million attacks on Microsoft customers every day.
Wow.
That's a Microsoft
phenomenal,
statistic, not my statistic, but 600 million attacks on Microsoft customers every day. Yeah. Any attack really that manages to access anyone with any kind of administrative control probably will lead to a total account takeover, or can easily lead to a total tenant takeover. Which is
detrimental,
obviously kind of, a disaster. In fact, there's an excellent white paper again on the CoreView website. It's called Total Tenant Takeover. It's basically a forensic analysis of the steps needed to achieve that and how quick and easy it is to do. And again, I'd recommend people listening to this podcast to go have a rummage around and find themselves a copy of that, because it puts into stark relief, really, how many avenues there are into the tenant, by not just the obvious ones of, a phishing email or someone, having a very foolish set of authentication credentials, but how many ways there are into the tenant that enable it to be undermined. And there's probably never been such a sprawling and such a potentially exploitable attack surface as Microsoft 365. It's as simple as that. So when you're looking at cyber resilience, you need to put the tenant resilience piece in the heart of your strategy, in the heart of your plans. And really that means, look, we all know how it works. We all pay Microsoft a load of money every month. It seems to go up all the time. And they take care of a bunch of things so we don't have to, So they produce great new features for their products. Fantastic. Their antivirus is, I think, now 41% of the endpoints in the world run Microsoft Defender by default. So they're taking care of all those pesky old viruses for us. At least that's the theory. We don't have to worry about having teams of people run around patching vulnerabilities in their software because, hey, they take care of that for us as well. So we don't have to worry about the latest zero-day exploit in Microsoft Word or Excel or whatever. So there's a bunch of stuff that's being done for us. And you know what the real worry is? The real worry is, therefore, that we take for granted the fact that everything's being done for us. And it isn't. And when it comes to the tenant, what that means is if you're making plans to try and make your organisation more resilient, there are certain things you should put in that plan and that you should enact. And those are the things we're going to talk about today.
Interesting. And it is, I mean, I don't think people appreciate quite how vast that kind of attack surface is until they really get down to it. So thank you so much for explaining that. So now that we have the idea that cyber resilience and what it is, how challenging Microsoft 365 is, what do you do to make the 365 tenant as resilient as the rest of the enterprise?
Well, I think there's really 5 pillars on which you should be building your plan. And these 5 pillars cover some things which might, at first glance, seem very obvious, but which aren't covered by Microsoft. They don't fall under the cheery old monthly subscription umbrella, and they're probably not even obvious to many, many people whose organizational lifeblood runs through Microsoft 365. And I'll just enumerate them now.
Absolutely.
And then we'll spend a little time looking at them in more detail. So first of all, there's the whole issue of how you go about hardening the tenant. I'll say a little more about that in a moment. There's how you can remove some privilege from it, some permissions and privileges from it, because by default it has way, way, way too much, and of the wrong sort, I might add. We'll look at how you can put in place some controls to see if the tenant's configuration is being tampered with. Mm-hmm. So are there bad guys inside the wire? And if there are they doing things to try and make stuff worse?
Yeah.
We look at how you can restore it, back it up and restore it should, disaster of some sort strike, and then how you can build some ongoing operational resilience into your activities. So those 5 pillars, I think, should form the basis of a plan for building tenant resilience into your overall cyber resilience plan.
Brilliant. And just for the audience's benefit, we've actually got a screenshot here of the 5 pillars that obviously they can reference to. And we're going to now, I think it's quite important, let's go into a little bit more detail, each one of the pillars, obviously from their point of view.
Yeah, so let's take them each in turn. So hardening the tenant always seems a bit of an odd thing to say, but I mean, I put it like this. If you had a server or even an endpoint, even a laptop, you wouldn't deploy it in an organizational sense without doing some things to harden it, to lock it down. to protect it. It seems a reasonable thing to do. You probably want to make sure that only passwords of a certain length could be used to access it. You might want to make sure you set up the cycle by which its updates would be applied. You might even want to have a couple of controls in there around when the antivirus gets updated and when it runs. Just some basic bits and bobs like that. You need to look at the tenant in exactly the same way. You wouldn't put a server out there without hardening it. You shouldn't put your tenant out there without hardening it. Okay. And if that seems like quite a big and a bit of a vague statement, a bit of a vague kind of, what John's saying is just a bit, there's no real clear definition to it. Let me give it some clarity. There's an organisation called the CIS, I think it's the Centre for Internet Security, if my memory serves me right, and they publish essentially benchmarks, security benchmarks, and their security benchmark for 365 is a set of the very best practice security recommendations they have for 365. Do you know how many of them there are? Nope. 140. There are 140 of them. Now, some of them will not be terribly relevant, but a good 90 plus of them are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they cover everything from how well you've defined what constitutes a good password, whether or not you're making provision to ensure that people can't log in from North Korea, and if they do, you know that someone's trying to. How you're going to deal with the issue of guest or external access into your tenant, a whole range of configuration sort of settings and switches. Yeah. So if you're going to harden your tenant, you really should be looking at something like that and saying, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this my golden image, my standard image, that my tenant should conform to, should comply to, and I'm going to push that out. Because then I know I've done one thing right from the get-go, and this is the preventative aspect of cyber resilience. Yeah. We're doing our best to prevent being exploited. There's something else that's relevant here, of course, and that is once you've pushed your tenant out, and you really can't afford to just go, there you are, I've done my job. Because, we live in a world where admins are overworked. They're constantly making changes and fixes, really, from a pragmatism point of view, just to get stuff done. Mm-hmm. And therefore, there's a tendency over time for this lovely, secure, CIS-approved and benchmarked configuration to drift. That's the only way to describe it, yeah? Mm-hmm. So what you need to do is not only push it out and be proud that you've pushed it out right, but also have a way to keep an eye on it. And this becomes even more important if you're responsible for multiple tenants. I was talking to an educational establishment not too long ago. They've got 9 tenants they're responsible for. Yeah, they want to make sure that all 9 are singing off the same song sheet. Yeah, and quite right too. So that's our first pillar, tenant hardening.
Brilliant.
Now, a second one really comes down to a feature of the way that Microsoft is designed, because even a cursory look at the environment will tell you that there is too much privilege in too many administrators' hands for good practice, safe practice. Yeah, Microsoft adopts the principle of having administrative roles with very, very broad privileges. So, for example, a SharePoint administrator, they can administer the SharePoint sites for the manufacturing facility in one country. They could also potentially administer the SharePoint sites for the executive finance team in another country. And you probably aren't going to want the same SharePoint administrator doing that kind of thing. Yeah. So there's too much privilege. And really, when you begin to see that becoming an issue is when you look at what could happen if one of those accounts became compromised. Because you rapidly move into the realm of, I've got an admin account, it's become compromised, that's almost certainly going to enable the threat actor to move laterally in the organisation, across it, from the manufacturing facility to the financial headquarters facility, for example. And it's almost certainly going to ultimately mean they're going to be able to take over the whole tenant in the end. Yeah. And this, of course, is harnessed to another problem which is well known for anyone who's involved in the world of Microsoft 365, which is there are generally too many people with global admin privilege out there anyway. You look at Microsoft's recommendations, they recommend a very small number. I think it's 2 or between 2 and 4, I think they recommend. There are countless organisations with way more global admins running around than there should be, more than that number.
Yeah.
So the second pillar you have to address is the issue of how you're going to strip out privilege, but do it in a way that doesn't stop people being able to do their jobs properly. And that's the caveat.
Yeah.
So that's our second pillar, remove privilege. And our third one is really down to, so that's a preventative one again. Yeah. Our third one is really down to how we respond if something bad is happening. And that's, can we find out what's going on, what's changed at a tenant level? Microsoft, 60 plus applications and services, as we've said, 18 different GUIs, colossal log files, the sight and shape of which would make grown men crumble and cry and
needle in a haystack.
And no single central simple way to see what's going on unless you have some very good buddies who are very good at PowerShell and are willing to spend lots of time developing exactly what you need. So the sorts of things you want to be able to see are, has someone tampered with the config? Because if they have, and there are good reasons why they might do it. If they have, you want to know, and you want to know quickly. Quite often, configuration will be tampered with to provide persistent access. So the opportunity to return via another route other than the one by which they arrived. Yeah. And that's quite well known. It's quite well established. It's a technique that goes all the way back to when people used to break into your flat to try and steal your TV back in the day. You know, I need a secondary access and egress point. Yeah. Because then I've got a backup for my nefarious activity. So you really want to make sure you know when something has changed, down to a very detailed level, because it could be that a particular policy, such as the refusing logins from North Korea, has been quietly removed, or the cycle for the Defender updates has been tinkered with in some shape or form. So you really want to know when those configs have been tampered with, and you want to be told. You don't want to stumble across the evidence after the event when you're trying to explain to the leadership team why things have gone horribly wrong. You want to be told now what's going on, with sufficient detail and clarity that you can act on it. So that's our third pillar. Our fourth pillar, I'm afraid, it falls under the umbrella of what to do when things really go badly wrong. So it's the how do we recover part of resilience.
When something bad's happened and you've got to...
And there we're really talking about the fact that, as will be familiar to many of the people listening to this podcast, whilst most sane people make a point of backing up their data, or having a third party back up their data, or having Microsoft back up their data. And by data, I mean their files, Teams messages, emails, all that good stuff. There is no mechanism by which you can simply and safely back up and restore the tenant configuration itself. Yeah. So if you are compromised and things go horribly wrong and you're trying to rebuild the platform on which your business runs, let's put it as boldly as that, you can have all the data backups in the world. You can have all of Catherine's emails and all of John's Teams messages, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the configuration into which to restore, the tenant configuration into which to restore them, your Defender policies, your authentication and login policies, your data loss protection policies, Purview, your Exchange mailboxes and your Exchange policies, if you don't have all that stuff, you're looking at climbing a mountain. So our fourth pillar has to be something to back up and restore the tenant. Okay. And then finally, our fifth pillar, and this is really, I think it falls into the bracket of the learning how to do things better in future part of cyber resilience. So it's the, how do we build some better operational resilience into what we're doing? And 9 times out of 10, you know what that comes down to? Automation. Automation is going to enable people with scarce and precious technical skill to spend more time dealing with high impact issues and less time dealing with drudgery, and leaving automation to securely help build resilience going forward is a great way of looking at that fifth pillar. It's also important when we start to talk about compliance, which we're going to go back to in a little bit, I think, because automation and compliance really go hand in hand. I'll say a little more about that.
I was hoping you weren't going to say learning from people's mistakes, because that's often the way, isn't it? As soon as they're breached or they have a security issue or they have a vulnerability, it's a case of kind of going back and saying, I should have done that the first time. I should have looked at the security. I should have backed up. I should have done this. And a lot of the time it's too late. And as you say, it's hard to pick up the pieces afterwards. You need to be looking at preventative.
In an environment like Microsoft 365, you have to also be honest and say that there are a whole bunch of really clever people spending time doing things like manually onboarding new members of the company and manually offboarding members of the company. And these are tasks that are time-consuming, technically fiddly, but they're taking up far too much of clever people's time. You shouldn't be doing it. And the secret to addressing that is automation.
Yeah. Fantastic. No, thank you so much. And, I really appreciate you running through the 5 pillars with us. I just wanted to bring us back, because obviously you mentioned it a couple of times, to our earlier conversation around the regulatory and legislative landscape. So could you explain how some of these frameworks are affecting organisations and just how exactly important they are to us?
Of course. So here's the thing, that there are a range of them. Which seems a bit off-putting at first, but actually when you look at them, they're all saying much the same thing, which is encouraging. You have those that are very specific. So NIST, for example, National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, for example, or the regulations issued by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, for example, and they say, you must do these things. So if you don't have multi-factor authentication with a good conditional access policy set up, then you're in breach of this regulatory framework. So they're very precise. Perhaps it's characteristic of the European Union. I don't know, but in the EU, things are much more set at present anyway. Although this is changing, I'll come to it in a moment. But they're much more set at a more, I suppose, a high-level business.
And they like evidence, don't they? They like to see what are you doing.
So it's a case of you should be able to show the authority that you have systems and plans in place to deal with risk management or to deal with incident management. So they're much more elevated in terms of what they're saying. And I'm thinking here about things like network infrastructure, for infrastructure systems, I think it is NIS2 across the EU, and also the Digital Operational Resilience Act. The clue's in the name. Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA, which is for the finance sector across the EU, and therefore by implication also across the UK and the rest of the world too, since finance is a global business. So some are very specific and detailed. Some are more strategic or high level. But every single one of them is all about resilience, and every single one of them is calling out for exactly the things that we've just discussed in those 5 pillars. So, what are your plans for prevention, detection, recovery, response, and learning from? Are you able to show us? Don't have to show us you're perfect. You have to show us what you're doing to try and get towards perfect. And that's why there is some urgency to this. And that's why organisations really have to be putting resilience in this form, out and put it on the table and deal with it. Because vendors love talking about the big bad fines that people are going to get. In reality, very few people get big bad fines. I mean, when GDPR was introduced, I think with the exception of BA in 2014,
quickly, didn't
didn't really bother sort of throwing threats and muscle around on the whole topic. It's about calling organisations into line to understand the fact that they have a responsibility and they need to execute on it.
No, completely agree. And that was going to be my next question in terms of how CoreView helps address those. We have included another visual for the audience to see, but I'd love, again, for you to give a little bit more detail around exactly that, kind of how CoreView helps address some of the, the legislative.
And of course, it'll come as no surprise. CoreView is all about tenant resilience. That's what we do. Microsoft 365 tenant resilience is what we do, and we specifically address the challenges that I've kind of overviewed across these 5 pillars. And so, if you look at something like tenant hardening, for example. Let's take tenant hardening. So you look at that, then you can push out a tenant config that is aligned to the CIS, Microsoft 365 security benchmarks, set of benchmarks. Yeah, you can push out a tenant config that's aligned with the Australian Cybersecurity Centre's Essential 8 framework for public sector, for example. You can push out the John and Catherine tenant configuration if you want, which is one that you've built for yourself that takes some good bits from this one and some good bits from that one and some good bits from another one and packages it all up and is the John and Catherine configuration, should you so wish to do so. Yeah. And crucially, you can keep it and store it as a golden image to go back to. So if you've got multiple John and Catherine tenants, you can push it out to multiple John and Catherine tenants. Yeah? Yep. If you need to deal with the fact that you've got a dev center and a production center, and you need to make sure that anything you're developing and testing is going to be the same as the environment in the real world, you can use that golden image across the two of them. So It's a fundamental of the way CoreView works, that it enables you to harden your tenant, and to be able to push it out and to be able to monitor it and be told when it starts to drift out of alignment. So if you've got half a dozen admins tinkering with it and it starts to move away from key policies on authentication, access control, identity, any of those things, it'll say you've moved out of alignment.
Nice.
So that's a way we help organisations address hardening the tenant. In terms of removing privilege, we essentially provide a way to segment a tenant into virtual segments, a dice and slice, if you will. Yeah. So you log in via CoreView, you don't necessarily see all of the tenant as an administrator. You see the administrative bits we want you to see, or rather that your security architect has decided you should be able to see in order to do your job. So, for example, if I have a help desk operatives and I want them to be able to deal with first line help desk support for the finance team in France, so that they can fix forgotten passwords and deal with mailbox management issues, and not much more than that, then I can use this we call it virtual tenant segmentation, but this way of dicing and slicing the tenant up. So you just, as an administrator, get the bit you need to do your job and no more. Yeah?
Interesting.
We can do that so that help desk can deal with who it needs to deal with, finance in France, and what it should be dealing with, fixing lost passwords and mailbox management, without them having any visibility at all of any other attribute of the tenant. And that's crucial. It's crucial because it restricts privilege. It's crucial because it means it's a lot harder if an account is compromised to move laterally within the tenant. And it means if you are responsible for managing multiple audiences within one tenant, things like privacy, security, all those things are so much easier to enforce. So that's our second pillar. That's restricting privilege. Number 3, configuration tampering. So CoreView tells you when someone does something at a tenant configuration level. It'll either tell you once a week, politely in an email, or it'll tell you instantly if you ask. And it'll tell you right down to the individual granular policy that has been changed, removed, added. And because it's storing the diff of everything that's been done, it enables you to say, I don't want that, and roll it back in a single click. Yeah. Or let me go and review that and decide whether I want it. Or I'm going to stop all this nonsense and create an automated approval workflow so no config changes can be made unless they go through this automated workflow process. So I've got no issues with being blindsided by surprise changes to the configuration. And what that helps us to do is to ensure that we've got our eyes across the risk of configuration tampering. We've got the ability to get some early warning if, for example, if someone's trying to establish some persistence in a tenant for a future return, to do something that we don't want them to do in some way.
Brilliant.
Fourth pillar, we back up and restore configurations. So we enable the organisation to back up its config and restore a small part if a little bit of it gets compromised, just by rewinding, or to restore the tenant itself should the very worst happen and the entirety of the tenant become compromised. And the reason that's important is because potentially the ability to return to business as usual after an incident is highly gated by how confident you are that your config is clean, safe, and something you want to go back and use. And we provide that capability. And then finally, our fifth pillar, if you remember, was one of operational resilience, if you will, building some operational resilience. And we do that by providing automation tools. And automation tools are essential because, A, they deal with a lot of the grunt work, which means that clever people can focus on clever things, and things like onboarding users, offboarding users, automatically running a review that says how many SharePoint sites are that no one's touched in the last 90 days, and comes back and says, I just thought I should tell you there are all these sites, what do you want us to do about them? Or all these Teams groups who haven't been in any way interactive with what do you want us to do with them? So it takes away grunt work, which means that clever people have more time in which to do clever things.
Impressive.
As a tangential benefit, the other thing that it brings is automation helps organizations reduce the cost of compliance, because compliance ultimately is a cost. You've just added to the negative side of the balance sheet when you've been told by a regulator or by a government you have to comply with something. So what automation does is it enables you to basically reduce your cost of compliance. And that gets thrown into very sharp relief when you look at very large organizations who often end up having to have teams of people that they employ because someone has said you need to comply with X, Y, Z, and we're going to come and audit you twice a year to see if you do. And what they want is tools to make that cheaper, and that's what CoreView helps them to do.
Fantastic.
So that's how we try to address those 5 pillars.
Brilliant. And again, obviously we can put a lot of information in the comments below, because I think that really help a lot of the audience and understand a little bit further. So just in conclusion to our discussion today, what key takeaways would you like to give the audience in terms of CoreView? So,
okay. Great point, and thank you. The resilience is a process. Cyber resilience is a process. I hate to use the word journey because I sound like one of those American movies. And they were on a journey. Well, it is nonetheless something like that. And in general, what everyone is looking for is the very best efforts to make things better, not to make things perfect, but to make things better. Cyber resilience is all about doing that across prevention, detection, response, recovery, and learning from. What you need to do in the context of your Microsoft 365 tenant is place it in the center of that plan, and then look at it and say to yourself, am I hardening this tenant? Am I removing privilege as best I can? Can I see when something's been tampered with? If the worst happens, have I got backups and restoration capability in place to continue with business as usual? And how can I learn from all this and automate going forward?
Yeah, brilliant. No, thank you very much. Key takeaways there. And I think also just, again, for any IT leaders, I think it's important they ask their team as well, isn't it? How are we doing this? What are we doing around backup and so on and so on? So that just leaves me to say thank you so much for coming in. I always love having CoreView in the studio and talking about the journey. And to all the audience out there, there's loads of resources in the comments below. So make sure you check it out and also look out for the next episode coming soon.